homeless maid's hands were still shaking from finding the Mafia Boss chained in the basement when he whispered 4 words through blood-soaked lips. "They killed my daughter." And in that moment, Grace Holloway felt the wound of her own dead child rip open all over again. It had started 3 hours earlier with a text message from a property management company she'd never worked for before. Simple job. Abandoned textile warehouse on the industrial edge of Phoenix. 4 hours of work clearing debris before the demolition crew arrived next week. $200 cash. Grace had learned not to ask questions about jobs that paid in cash. Questions meant complications. Complications meant losing work. Losing work meant sleeping in her van another month instead of saving enough for a security deposit on an actual apartment. The building looked exactly like the listing described. Crumbling red brick, boarded windows, weeds pushing through cracks in the parking lot. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt, heat shimmering in waves that made the whole structure look like it might dissolve into the desert air. Grace pulled her cleaning supplies from the back of her van and approached the side entrance where the property manager had said she'd find an unlocked door. The key was under the 3rd brick from the corner, exactly where the text message promised. She let herself into the stifling heat of the main floor. Dust particles danced in the shafts of sunlight cutting through gaps in the boarded windows. Old machinery sat abandoned, covered in years of grime. The smell of rust and decay filled her nose. Grace set down her bucket and pulled out her phone to document the condition of the space before she started cleaning. No signal, she frowned. The phone had shown full bars in the parking lot. Now, nothing. Grace shook her head and pocketed the device. She'd worked in dead zones before. Phoenix had plenty of old industrial buildings with thick concrete walls that blocked everything. She'd just have to remember to step outside every hour to check messages. The main floor took 90 minutes to sweep and photograph. Grace worked methodically, the way she'd learned during her nursing rotations a lifetime ago. Document everything, miss nothing. Leave no questions unanswered. Old habits died hard, even when your whole life had burned to ashes around them. The text from the property manager came through the moment she stepped outside for air. "Don't forget the basement storage area. Needs clearing too. Extra 50 if you finish it today." Grace stared at the message. She hadn't seen basement stairs anywhere on the main floor. She walked back inside, searching more carefully. There, in the back corner behind a stack of collapsed shelving, a metal door with a rusted handle. She pulled it open. Concrete stairs descended into darkness. The smell that wafted up made her stomach clench. Damp concrete, metal, something organic and wrong. Her flashlight cut a narrow beam through the thick shadows as she descended. The temperature dropped with each step. By the time she reached the bottom, goosebumps covered her arms despite the Phoenix heat baking the building above. The basement stretched out before her, support beams rising like skeletal fingers toward the ceiling. Old storage crates, abandoned equipment, and in the far corner, barely visible in the flashlight's weak glow, something that made her breath catch in her throat. Chains. Heavy industrial chains bolted to a support beam. And slumped against that beam, a man. Blood pooled beneath him in a dark halo that had started to dry at the edges but still glistened wet in the center. His white dress shirt was torn open, soaked crimson. A gunshot wound in his left shoulder, deep gashes across his ribs that looked like knife wounds. His face was bruised beyond recognition, swollen and purple, one eye completely sealed shut. Grace's nursing training took over before her fear could stop her. She moved closer, dropping to her knees beside him. Her fingers found his throat, searching for a pulse. There. Weak. Freddie, barely there. His breathing was shallow, each inhale a wet rattle that spoke of internal bleeding. The chains rattled as his right hand moved slightly. His eyes opened. Ice blue, even through the haze of pain and dying. They focused on her face with an intensity that pinned her in place. "Help!" he whispered, the word gurgling through blood in his throat. Grace pressed her hands against the worst of the wounds, trying to slow the bleeding. Her supplies were upstairs. She had gauze, antiseptic, but nothing for injuries like these. He needed a hospital. He needed a trauma surgeon. He needed help she couldn't give. "I'll call an ambulance," she said, reaching for her phone. His hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping her wrist.
"No."
The word came out fierce despite his failing voice. "They'll kill me. They'll kill you." "You're dying right now," Grace said. "You need help." His ice blue eyes held hers. "They killed my daughter." The words stopped her heart. Time fractured. For one terrible moment, Grace was somewhere else. A hospital room, machines beeping, a tiny hand in hers, so small, so cold. Lily, 3 years old. Leukemia that the insurance company called a pre-existing condition. that the treatments they refused to cover might have saved, that killed her anyway while Grace drowned in medical debt, that eventually took her apartment, her job, her entire life. She was back in the basement. The man was still looking at her, still dying, still chained to a beam in an abandoned warehouse like an animal left to bleed out alone in the dark. "What's your name?" Grace heard herself ask. "Gabriel," he coughed. Blood flecked his lips. Gabriel Stone. The name hit her like a physical blow. She knew that name. Everyone in Phoenix knew that name. Real estate developer, billionaire, the man whose face had been on every news channel 3 weeks ago when he vanished without a trace. The man the authorities claimed had fled the country after embezzling millions from his company and investors. Except he hadn't fled anywhere. Chained, tortured, left to die. I didn't know that saving him would cost me everything I had left, Grace would think later. But in that moment, all she knew was that she'd been the one dying once. Invisible, alone, praying someone would see her, would help, would care that she existed. No one had. She couldn't be that person. She couldn't walk away from someone else's daughter, someone else's grief, someone else's death. Grace stood. "I'm getting my supplies. Don't move." The ghost of a smile crossed his bloodied face. "The chains make that difficult." She ran for the stairs. Her van was only 50 yards away. Gauze, bandages, the antibiotics she'd saved from her last tooth infection, water, anything that might keep him alive long enough to figure out what to do next. Her footsteps echoed on the concrete steps as she climbed toward daylight. That's when she heard it. A car engine, close, getting closer. Tires on gravel in the parking lot outside. Grace froze at the top of the stairs. Through a gap in the boarded window, she saw a black luxury sedan pulling up beside her van. 2 men got out, expensive suits. One of them pulled out a phone, talking in clipped tones she couldn't make out. The other scanned the building, his hand resting on something at his hip. A gun, she realized. His hand was resting on a gun. They were coming back to finish the job. If your heart is racing right now, hit that like button. And don't forget to comment the country you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel, because what happens next will test everything you thought you knew about courage. Grace's feet hit the basement stairs before conscious thought caught up to her body. The men outside would check the building. They'd find her van. They'd know someone was here. Her cleaning supplies sat abandoned on the main floor like a beacon screaming her presence. She had minutes, maybe less. Gabriel's eyes were closed when she reached him. For one terrible second, she thought he'd already died. Then his chest rose with another wet, rattling breath. Grace dropped to her knees and pulled the small toolkit from her cleaning belt. She'd carried these tools for 3 years, ever since the night she'd locked herself out of her van in a hospital parking lot, and a kind maintenance worker had shown her how to pick the simple lock. The chains binding Gabriel to the support beam were industrial grade, but the padlocks were standard hardware store quality. Someone had chained him here in a hurry, or they'd assumed he'd be dead before it mattered. Grace's hands shook as she inserted the tension wrench into the first lock. Above them, she heard footsteps on the main floor. Heavy, deliberate. Multiple sets. "Stay quiet," she whispered to Gabriel, though he seemed barely conscious. The first pin lifted, then the second. Grace's nursing training had taught her steady hands under pressure, delivering bad news to families, starting IVs on screaming children, performing CPR while someone's husband watched, begging her to save his wife. Those moments had required absolute control. No shaking, no hesitation. The lock clicked open. The sound echoed in the basement like a gunshot. Grace froze, listening. The footsteps above had stopped. Silence pressed down on them, thick and suffocating. Then the footsteps resumed, moving toward the back of the building, toward the basement door. Grace attacked the second lock with renewed desperation. Her daughter's face flashed through her mind. Lily in the hospital bed, tubes everywhere, asking why the medicine had stopped. Grace explaining that insurance wouldn't pay anymore. Lily asking if that meant she was going to die. Grace lying, saying everything would be okay, knowing it wouldn't be. Watching her baby slip away over the next 6 weeks while bills piled up like tombstones marking the death of their entire life. The second lock opened. Gabriel slumped forward as the chains fell away. Grace caught him struggling under his weight. He was easily twice her size, solid muscle under the blood-soaked clothes. She got her shoulder under his arm, leveraging him upright with strength she didn't know she still had. "Can you walk?" she asked. His eyes opened halfway. "Where?" She half dragged, half carried him toward the far corner of the basement where she'd spotted a small window during her initial scan of the space. It was high, barely 2 feet wide, probably original to the building from decades ago when this warehouse stored textiles instead of torture victims. Gabrielle's wallet had fallen from his torn pants pocket during their struggle to move. Grace grabbed it, shoving it into her own pocket without thinking. Evidence, proof, something. She didn't know what, only that it might matter later. That's when she saw the tattoo on his wrist, a small outline of a bird, delicate, feminine, the kind of thing a daughter might draw for her father, the kind of thing a father might make permanent to carry with him forever. She drew it, Gabriel whispered, following Grace's gaze. The day before they killed her. The grief in his voice matched the grief Grace carried in her chest every second of every day, the weight that never lifted, the absence that filled every space, the phantom pain of loving someone who would never come home. They reached the window. Grace tested it. Locked, but the frame was old wood, rotted from years of Phoenix heat and occasional rain. She grabbed a piece of broken pipe from the floor and smashed the lock. The sound rang out like a bell. Above them, the basement door opened. Light flooded down the stairs. Voices followed. Male. Angry. Someone had found her cleaning supplies on the main floor. Someone knew the building had been compromised. Move? Grace hissed, boosting Gabriel toward the window. He was weak, fading, but survival instinct kicked in. He pulled himself up with Grace pushing from below, forcing his shoulders through the narrow opening. She heard fabric tear, heard him grunt in pain as his injuries scraped against the window frame. Then he was through, collapsing onto the ground outside. Grace jumped, grabbed the window ledge, pulled herself up. Her arms burned, her shoulders screamed. She hadn't done a pull-up since high school gym class, but fear gave her strength that 3 years of homelessness had stolen. She was halfway through when she heard the voices grow louder, closer. Someone was coming down the stairs. Grace kicked her legs free and dropped to the ground beside Gabriel. The fall jarred her ankles, sent pain shooting up her shins, but she was out. They were out. Can you stand? She asked Gabriel. He managed to get to his knees. Grace pulled him upright. They stumbled around the side of the building, staying low, moving toward where she'd parked her van on the far side of the lot. 50 yards of open space. No cover. Broad afternoon daylight. The photo in his wallet made me gasp, Grace would think later, when she had time to look. The little girl with dark curls and Gabriel's ice blue eyes. The caption on the back reading, Lily Stone, age 8 inches in careful child's handwriting. The same name as Grace's daughter. The same age Grace's daughter would have been if she'd lived. But right now, all Grace knew was that footsteps were pounding toward the basement window they'd escaped through. Shouts echoed behind them. Someone had found the empty chains. Grace and Gabriel reached her van. She threw open the back doors and helped him collapse onto the blankets and pillows that served as her bed. She slammed the doors shut, ran to the driver's seat, started the engine. A man appeared at the corner of the building. Suit, gun drawn, his eyes locked onto Grace's van. She threw the vehicle into reverse and floored the accelerator. Tires screamed on hot asphalt. The man raised his weapon. I heard voices outside the basement door, Grace remembered. Multiple voices. Which meant multiple men. Which meant whoever wanted Gabriel dead had brought backup to finish what they'd started. Grace spun the wheel, shifted into drive and rocketed toward the exit. In her rearview mirror, 2 more men appeared. 3 total. All armed, all running for the black sedan. This was no longer a cleaning job gone wrong. This was survival. And Grace had just made herself a target by saving a man the entire world believed was a criminal on the run. Grace drove without direction for the first 10 minutes, taking random turns through Phoenix's industrial district while her heart hammered against her ribs. Behind her, in the back of the van where she slept most nights, Gabriel Stone lay bleeding onto the blankets that comprised everything she owned. Traffic was light in this part of the city during midday. Warehouses and manufacturing plants stretched along empty streets baking under the relentless Arizona sun. Grace forced herself to breathe, forced herself to think. The men with guns would be following. They had her license plate. They probably had resources she couldn't begin to imagine. She needed to disappear, needed to get Gabriel somewhere safe, needed to figure out what to do next. Where are we going? Gabriel's voice came weak from the back. Grace glanced in the rearview mirror. He'd propped himself against the side panel, one hand pressed against the gunshot wound in his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. I don't know yet, Grace admitted. Just away from there, they'll find us. More blood on his lips. More blood on his lips. Richard has connections everywhere. Police. Government. He'll track your vehicle. Who's Richard? My business partner. Gabriel's eyes drifted closed. then snapped open again like he was fighting unconsciousness. Former partner, he framed me. Embezzlement. Fraud. Crimes I never committed. When I found proof, when I tried to expose him, he took my daughter. His voice broke, made it look like an accident. Car off a bridge. She was 8 years old. Grace's hands tightened on the steering wheel. 8, the same age Lily would have been. I'm sorry, she said. He knew I'd come after him. Knew I'd never stop. Gabrielle's breathing was getting worse, each inhale more laboured than the last. So he chained me in that warehouse, left me to die where no one would ever find the body. Then he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, pulling himself forward. You need to leave me somewhere and run. You saved my life. That's enough. Don't destroy yours trying to help me further. Grace pulled the van into an empty lot behind an abandoned strip mall. She climbed into the back and started pulling supplies from the plastic bins where she kept her meagre possessions. Gauze, medical tape, the antibiotics, a bottle of water, hydrogen peroxide that would hurt like hell but might prevent infection. I was a nurse, she said, cutting away what remained of Gabriel's shirt. Before, I know how to help. The gunshot wound had gone clean through his shoulder. Exit wound in the back. Grace packed both sides with gauze, wrapping it tight. The knife wounds across his ribs were shallow but wide. She cleaned them carefully, watching Gabriel's face contort with pain he refused to voice. Why are you doing this? He asked, when she finished bandaging the worst of it. Grace didn't answer right away. She checked his pulse. Still weak. Still too fast. He'd lost a lot of blood. He needed IV fluids, possibly surgery if the bullet had nicked anything vital. He needed a hospital. Hospitals meant questions. Questions meant police. Police meant whoever Richard had in his pocket would know exactly where to find them. There's a clinic, Grace said. East Side. Used to serve the homeless population before funding dried up 2 years ago. It's been abandoned since then. I've slept there a few times when winter got too cold for the van. It might still have supplies. Gabriel studied her face. You're risking everything for a stranger. You are not a stranger anymore. Grace climbed back into the driver's seat. You're someone who lost a daughter the same age as mine. Someone who got destroyed by a system that protects the powerful and discards everyone else. That makes you family as far as I'm concerned. She pulled out of the parking lot and headed east, taking side streets and avoiding major intersections. The clinic was 30 minutes away in a neighborhood where police rarely patrolled, and security cameras were a luxury no one could afford. The kind of neighborhood where people learn not to see things, not to ask questions, not to get involved. Halfway there, I saw the black SUV turn onto our street. Grace's breath caught. 2 cars back. Sleek. Expensive. Tinted windows. It could have been anyone. Phoenix had thousands of black SUVs. But something about the way it moved, the way it seemed to track her van, sent ice through her veins. She took the next right. The SUV followed. Another right. Still following. Grace accelerated, weaving through traffic, taking turns too fast for safety. The van's old engine protested. Behind her, Gabriel groaned as the movement jarred his injuries. The SUV kept pace. Then his phone started ringing. The sound cut through the van's interior like an alarm. Gabriel's eyes went wide. He pulled the device from his pocket with his good hand, stared at the screen. Unknown number, he said. Don't answer it. Gabriel hesitated, then silenced the call. 10 seconds later, it rang again. Same unknown number. Persistent. They're tracking it, Grace said. The phone, that's how they found us. Gabriel powered off the device. Grace took 3 more random turns, then pulled into a parking garage, drove up 2 levels and waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. No black SUV appeared. Grace's hands were shaking on the steering wheel. She'd lost them, for now. The clinic sat at the end of a dead-end street, lined with boarded-up houses and vacant lots, where desert plants had reclaimed the spaces humans abandoned. The building was single-story, stucco painted a faded yellow that had probably been cheerful once. Now it just looked tired. Grace helped Gabriel out of the van and across the cracked parking lot. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, turning the asphalt into a griddle. Gabriel could barely walk. He leaned his full weight against her, his skin burning with fever. Grace could feel through her shirt. The clinic door was already open. Grace stopped. She'd been here 6 months ago. The door had been locked, chained. She'd climbed through a broken window in the back to sleep in one of the exam rooms, where the padded table was more comfortable than her van's floor. Now the door stood ajar, unlocked, like someone had just walked through it. Grace pushed it open slowly. The waiting room looked the same as she remembered. Faded chairs, old magazines still scattered on tables, reception desk covered in dust. But something felt different. Wrong. She helped Gabriel to one of the chairs, then moved deeper into the building. The hallway leading to the exam rooms was dark. Grace pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The first exam room was empty. The second was empty. The third made Grace stop cold. Fresh supplies. Bandages still in packaging. IV bags hanging from a makeshift pole. Medical equipment that definitely had not been here 6 months ago. And on the exam table, bloodstains that looked recent. Days old, maybe. Not months. Someone had been using this clinic. Someone who needed the same things Gabriel needed. Someone who'd been hurt and hiding, just like them. Grace heard movement behind her. She spun around. A man stood in the doorway, older, maybe 60, with grey hair and weathered skin. Thin but solid. He wore military-style cargo pants and a faded jacket despite the heat. His eyes were sharp, alert, taking in Grace and then looking past her toward the waiting room where Gabriel sat. "You're the woman from the van," he said, voice rough like gravel. "Saw you pull up." Grace's hand moved instinctively to her pocket. She had a small folding knife. Nothing that would stop a determined attacker, but something. The man's eyes flicked to Gabriel, visible through the doorway. His expression changed. Recognition. Shock. Something else Grace couldn't read. "I know him," the man said quietly. "Gabriel Stone. They said he ran. Said he stole millions. Said he was a criminal." He looked at Grace. "But I know what I saw at the warehouse on Mill Road 3 weeks ago. I know who really did it. Subscribe to find out if their cover just got blown. Because the veteran knows something that changes everything." The veteran's name was Hayes, Robert Hayes. Former Army medic. 20 years of service before the VA failed him the way it failed so many others. He'd been living in the abandoned clinic for 4 months, using it as shelter, and occasionally helping other homeless people who needed medical attention they couldn't afford. "I was scavenging supplies from a dumpster behind a pharmacy on Mill Road," Hayes said, working quickly to set up an IV for Gabriel. His hands moved with the precision of someone who'd done this hundreds of times under worse conditions. 3 weeks ago, late afternoon. "I saw them loading someone into a black sedan behind the warehouse. Saw the blood. Saw the man's face." He glanced at Gabriel. "Your face. You were unconscious. They threw you in the trunk like garbage." Grace held Gabriel's arm steady while Hayes inserted the IV needle. Gabriel flinched but didn't cry out. Colour was slowly returning to his face as the saline solution began replacing lost fluids. "Why didn't you call the police?" Grace asked. Hayes laughed, bitter and hard. "I'm homeless. The police don't believe people like us. They'd have written it off as delusions or drunkenness, and even if they believed me, whoever did this has enough power to make a man disappear in broad daylight. You think they can't make an old veteran disappear too?" The veteran pulled out a gun. Grace stepped back instinctively, but Hayes just set the weapon on the counter beside his medical supplies. "Relax. I'm not going to shoot you. But if whoever's hunting him finds this place, we'll need more than bandages to survive." Gabriel's eyes opened fully for the first time since they'd arrived. The IV was working. Hayes had cleaned and redressed his wounds with proper medical supplies, had given him antibiotics from his own stash, had stopped the bleeding that Grace's amateur attempts had only slowed. "Thank you," Gabriel said to Hayes. His voice was stronger now. "Both of you." Hayes nodded. "I've seen enough innocent people destroyed by powerful men. Time someone fought back." He looked at Grace. "What's your story? Why are you helping him?" "Because he lost his daughter," Grace said quietly. "Same as me." Gabrielle's eyes found hers. "You have a daughter?" "Had." The word came out broken. "Lily. She died 3 years ago. Leukemia. The insurance company refused to cover treatment, called it pre-existing. I couldn't afford the bills. I tried everything, sold everything, borrowed from everyone. It didn't matter. She died anyway. The debt destroyed me. Lost my job. Lost my apartment. Lost everything except a van and the memory of watching my baby die because money mattered more than her life." That's when he said my daughter's name. "Lily," Gabriel whispered. "My daughter. Her name was Lily too." The coincidence felt impossible. 2 Lileys, both 8 years old, both dead because powerful people decided their lives were expendable. Grace felt something crack open in her chest, some wall she'd built to survive 3 years of grief and homelessness. "Richard Blackwood killed her," Gabriel said, the name coming out like poison. "My business partner. We built stone properties together. 40 buildings across Phoenix, hundreds of millions in assets. I thought he was my friend, my brother. I trusted him with everything." Gabriel closed his eyes. 6 months ago, I found discrepancies in our accounts. Money moving through shell companies, bribes to city officials, fraud. on a massive scale. I confronted Richard. He begged me to stay quiet, promised to fix it. I told him I was going to the authorities. 2 weeks later, my daughter's car went off a bridge. Police called it an accident, said the brakes failed. But I knew Richard had mechanics on his payroll, knew he had the connections to make murder look like mechanical failure. I hired a private investigator, found proof, recordings, documents, everything. Gabriel's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I gave it all to my lawyer, told her to hide it somewhere safe, told her if anything happened to me, send it to the FBI. Then Richard invited me to that warehouse to talk things through. I was stupid enough to go alone. Hayes was already moving, gathering supplies into a backpack. Where's this lawyer? Scottsdale, Gabriel said. Her office is in Old Town. She has everything. All the evidence we need to destroy Richard and everyone working with him. Someone knocked on the clinic door. All three of them froze. Hayes grabbed his gun. Grace's hand went to the knife in her pocket. The knock came again, harder, more insistent. Open up. Phoenix PD. We received a report of suspicious activity. Hayes moved to the window, peered through the blinds. 2 patrol cars. 4 officers. They're real police, not Richard's people. How can you tell? Grace asked. Because Richard's people wouldn't knock. The knocking continued. Grace looked at Gabriel, still too weak to run. Looked at Hayes, who'd risked everything to help them. Looked at the door that separated them from police who might be honest or might be corrupted, who might save them or might deliver them straight to Richard Blackwood. On the counter, Hayes' old television flickered to life. He must have left it on. The afternoon news played across the dusty screen, and there, filling the frame, was a man in an expensive suit standing behind a podium covered in microphones. Richard Blackwood, handsome, distinguished, the picture of concerned corporate leadership. The chyron beneath him read, Stone Properties partner finds new evidence in embezzlement case. I've just been informed by federal investigators, Richard said, his voice heavy with false sorrow, that Gabrielle Stone's crimes were even more extensive than we initially believed. New evidence suggests he may have been involved in money laundering for organized crime. If anyone has information about his whereabouts, please contact authorities immediately. This man is dangerous. The knocking on the door grew louder. Hayes got them out through the back window while the police pounded on the front door. The same window Grace had used 6 months ago when she'd first found this place. They moved fast through the alley, Gabriel leaning on Grace, Hayes covering their retreat with his gun drawn but hidden under his jacket. The police never saw them leave. By the time the officers broke down the clinic door, all they found was an empty building with signs someone had been squatting there, nothing connecting it to Gabriel Stone. Nothing worth pursuing for officers who had real crimes to investigate. They spent the night in Grace's van, parked behind a 24-hour diner 3 miles away. Hayes took first watch while Grace and Gabriel tried to sleep in the cramped space. Gabrielle's fever had broken. The antibiotics and IV fluids had pulled him back from the edge. He'd live. The question now was for how long. Morning came early, sunlight streaming through the van's windows by 5:30. Grace woke to find Gabriel already awake, staring at the ceiling, his face drawn with pain that had nothing to do with his injuries. I dream about her, he said without looking at Grace. Every night. Lily in the car. The moment before it went off the bridge. I wasn't there, couldn't save her, couldn't do anything except identify her body afterward. Grace sat up, her back aching from sleeping on the hard floor. I dream about mine too. The hospital room, watching the machines, knowing each beep might be the last. Hayes returned from his patrol around the van. We need to move soon. Scottsdale's an hour drive. We should get there before business hours, fewer people to see us. Grace pulled scissors and hair clippers from one of her storage bins. She'd used them to keep her own hair short and manageable while living in the van. Now she studied Gabriel's face. Even bruised and battered, he was recognizable. The strong jaw, the ice blue eyes that every news station had broadcast for weeks. I need to change how you look, she said. Gabriel nodded. Do what you have to. She touched the scar on his shoulder, checking the bandage underneath his borrowed shirt. Her fingers lingered a moment longer than necessary. Gabriel's eyes met hers. Something passed between them. Recognition, understanding. The bond that forms between people who've survived trauma together. Grace began cutting his hair. It had been professionally styled, probably cost more than she'd earned in a month back when she had a job. Now it fell in dark chunks onto the newspapers Hayes had spread on the van floor. She worked carefully, shortening it to a military buzz cut that changed the shape of his face. You were a good nurse, Gabriel said quietly. I was an adequate nurse, Grace corrected. Good nurses don't lose patients because they can't afford treatment. That's not on you. That's on a broken system. Knowing that doesn't make it hurt less. She finished with the clippers and studied her work. Gabriel looked different, harder. The expensive polish was gone. He could pass for a construction worker now. Someone ordinary, invisible. Grace found clothes in her donation bin. Jeans, a plain t-shirt, work boots. Nothing that screamed billionaire developer. Gabriel changed while Grace and Hayes planned the route to Scottsdale. The lawyer's name is Patricia Morrison, Gabriel said. Her office is on Main Street in Old Town. She's been my attorney for 10 years. I trust her completely. Does Richard know about her? Hayes asked. Yes, but he doesn't know I gave her the evidence. I made sure of that. They left at 6:15, joining early morning traffic on the 101 Grace drove. Hayes sat in the passenger seat with his gun hidden but ready. Gabrielle lay in the back, staying low, out of sight from other vehicles. The journey to Scottsdale took 70 minutes instead of 60. Grace avoided highways with camera systems, taking surface streets where an old van wouldn't draw attention. The sun climbed higher, Phoenix waking up around them, people going to work, living normal lives, not running from killers or carrying evidence of corruption. Gabrielle told stories as they drove. How he'd built his company from nothing. How Richard had been there from the beginning, the trusted partner who handled the financial side while Gabriel focused on development. How he'd never suspected, never saw the betrayal coming until it was too late. Lily loved architecture, Gabriel said. She'd come to construction sites with me, wear a little hard hat I had custom made. She wanted to build things that lasted forever, buildings people would remember. His voice broke. She was 8 years old. She should have had forever. Grace's hands tightened on the steering wheel. My Lily wanted to be a doctor. She'd practice giving shots to her stuffed animals. Made me buy her a toy stethoscope. She'd listen to my heartbeat and tell me I was healthy. I'd live to be 100. Grace blinked back tears. She died believing I'd grow old. She never knew the insurance company valued profit more than her life. They took everything from us, Gabriel said, and they're still walking free. Not for long, Hayes added from the front seat. Then we heard sirens. Grace's heart jumped. In the rearview mirror, 2 police cruisers appeared, lights flashing, coming up fast. She forced herself to maintain speed. Don't panic, don't run. Running would confirm guilt. The cruisers blew past them, heading to some other emergency. Not them, not today. Grace let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. They reached Old Town Scottsdale at 8:30. The area was already busy with tourists and morning shoppers, art galleries, boutiques, restaurants preparing for lunch crowds. Patricia Morrison's office occupied the second floor of a renovated building painted terracotta red. Grace parked 3 blocks away. They couldn't risk the van being spotted directly outside the lawyer's office. Hayes stayed with the vehicle while Grace and Gabriel walked the remaining distance, moving like any other couple out for a morning stroll. The office door was locked. Office hours didn't start until 9. Gabrielle knocked anyway, waited, knocked again. A woman appeared on the other side of the glass. 50s. Professional suit. Her eyes widened when she recognized Gabriel despite his changed appearance. She unlocked the door and pulled them inside quickly, relocking it behind them. They said you were dead, Patricia Morrison said. Richard held a memorial service last week, gave a speech about what a tragedy it all was. He's the one who put me in that warehouse, Gabriel said. Patricia's hands were shaking as she led them to her office. I know. I've known since the day you gave me the evidence. I've been waiting, hoping you were alive somewhere, praying you'd come back. She pulled a safe deposit box from her office safe. Inside were USB drives, documents, recordings. Everything's here. Richard's fraud, the shell companies, the bribes to city officials, the payments to the police officers who look the other way, the connections to organized crime. Gabriel took the evidence like it was sacred. This proves everything. He pulled out a second phone I'd never seen, one that had been hidden in his boot, battery dead. He'd kept it off to avoid tracking. There are more files on this. Communications with Richard. His admission about Lily. About the accident that wasn't an accident. Patricia's face went pale. Gabriel, there's something else. Something I discovered 2 days ago. She pulled out another document. The corruption goes higher than we thought. The judge assigned to hear any case we bring against Richard, Judge Thomas Winters. He's been receiving payments from Richard's shell companies for 3 years. He's completely compromised. The room fell silent. The evidence they needed to destroy Richard Blackwood would be heard by a judge already bought and paid for. Justice, once again, was for sale to the highest bidder. Patricia Morrison made the call from a burner phone purchased specifically for this moment. She'd been preparing for Gabriel's return, hoping for it, planning what to do if it ever happened. The Phoenix FBI field office answered on the third ring. I have information about the Gabriel Stone case, Patricia said. Information that proves his innocence and exposes corruption at the highest levels. I need to speak with someone who can guarantee protection. 30 minutes later, they had a meeting scheduled. Noon, Chaparral Park in Scottsdale. Public location, neutral ground. FBI Special Agent Rodriguez would meet them alone. Grace drove them to the park with Hayes in the passenger seat. Gabriel lay in the back again, hidden from view. Every mile felt like walking deeper into a trap. FBI agents could be honest or corrupted, could offer salvation or deliver them straight to Richard Blackwood. You don't have to do this, Gabriel said to Grace. You can drop me off and disappear, change your name, drive to another state, start over. And what happens to you? I testify. I finish what I started. I make Richard pay for what he did to Lily. Grace pulled into the parking lot. You're not doing this alone. The park was busy at midday. Families with children, joggers on the paths, people eating lunch on benches under the shade of mesquite trees, normal people living normal lives. Grace envied them with an intensity that hurt. Agent Rodriguez was exactly where she said she'd be. A woman in her 40s, Latino professional suit that somehow made her blend into the park crowd. She sat alone on a bench near the playground, watching kids on the swings. Grace and Gabriel approached. Hayes stayed by the van, watching for threats. Gabrielle Stone, Rodriguez said when they sat down. Not a question.
A statement. I've been looking for you for 3 weeks.
Most of my colleagues think you're dead or in Mexico. I was starting to believe them. Richard Blackwood tried to make the first part true, Gabriel said. Rodriguez studied him. Then Grace. And you are Grace Holloway. I found him chained in a warehouse. I saved his life. You put yourself in considerable danger doing that. I didn't have much of a life to risk. Rodriguez nodded slowly. We've been building a case against Richard Blackwood for 2 years. Money laundering, fraud, connections to organized crime. But he's careful, smart. Every time we get close, evidence disappears. Witnesses recant. We need someone on the inside, someone who knows where the bodies are buried. I have everything, Gabriel said. Documents, recordings, proof of every crime he's committed, including murder. Your daughter, Rodriguez said quietly. I read the police report. Mechanical failure. I never believed it. Gabriel's jaw tightened. He killed her because I was going to expose him. Made it look like an accident. She was 8 years old. Rodriguez pulled out a phone and made a quick call. I'm bringing them in, she said to whoever answered. Yes, both of them. Protective custody, full detail. She hung up and looked at Gabriel and Grace. You testify we can destroy him, but you'll need to disappear until trial. New identities. Safe houses, complete isolation from your old lives. Grace felt the weight of the offer settle over her. Disappear, start over, live under a false name in a place where no one knew her. She'd already lost everything once. Could she lose herself too? What about me? Grace asked. I'm homeless. I have no legal identity anymore, no job, no address. Why would you protect someone like me? Because you're a witness, Rodriguez said. You found Gabriel. You can testify to his condition, to the warehouse, to the evidence of torture. Your testimony corroborates his, makes the case stronger. Gabriel turned to Grace. You don't have to do this. This is my fight. I'm already in it. Not like this. Testifying means exposure, scrutiny. They'll dig into your past, your daughter, the dead. Everything you've tried to survive. They'll use it against you, against both of us. The agent's radio crackled with urgent message. Rodriguez lifted it to her ear, listened, her expression darkening. We have a problem. Multiple vehicles converging on this location. Black sedans. They're looking for someone. Grace's blood went cold. Richard. How did he find us? Gabriel asked. Then I saw who was watching us from across the park. A man in an expensive suit standing by the restrooms, phone to his ear, eyes locked on their bench. He wasn't hiding, wasn't trying to blend in. He wanted them to see him, wanted them to know they'd been found. Rodriguez was already moving. We need to go. Now. They stood. Gabriel grabbed Grace's hand. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out. His face went white. His phone showed a photo that made his face go white. Grace's van, Hayes standing beside it, and surrounding the vehicle 4 men in suits, guns visible. Hayes had his hands raised in surrender. They have your friend, Rodriguez said, seeing the photo. We can get him out, but you need to come with me right now. Trust me or don't, but make the choice fast, because in 30 seconds this park is going to be a war zone. Gabrielle looked at Grace. I won't leave without her. Protection for both of us, or I walk into Richard's hands right here. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. Both of you. Let's move. I testify, Grace said. The words came out stronger than she felt. I tell the truth. All of it, even if it destroys me. Because he killed your daughter, and the system let him. He killed my daughter through greed, and the system protected him. Someone has to stand up and say enough. Gabrielle's hand tightened on hers. You're the bravest person I've ever met. I'm terrified. Courage and terror aren't opposites. They're partners. Rodriguez was already calling for backup. Multiple units responding, but the park was filling with civilians. Children, families. If shooting started, innocent people would die. Gabriel pulled Grace close. His hand cupped her face. Thank you, he said, for saving my life. For standing with me. For being willing to fight when you had every reason to run. He kissed her. The kiss was gentle despite the chaos. Tender despite the violence closing in around them. A promise. A beginning. An acknowledgement that what had started as a stranger saving a dying man had become something deeper. Something worth protecting. Worth fighting for. Grace kissed him back. Tasting blood and hope and the future they might not live to see. Rodriguez grabbed them both. We move now. Stay close. Don't run. Walk like nothing's wrong. They crossed the park toward Rodriguez's vehicle. Federal agents were arriving, unmarked cars pulling into strategic positions. The man who'd been watching them had disappeared. Hayes was being escorted away from Grace's van by agents who'd managed to extract him from Richard's people. They were 50 feet from Rodriguez's car when Grace saw it. Richard Blackwood's Mercedes, sleek, black, pulling into the parking lot entrance. The man himself visible through the windshield. Handsome, composed, a predator who'd found his prey and knew they had nowhere left to run. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, share it with someone who loves a good thriller. Because what happens next will test whether love can survive when everything is on the line. The FBI safe house in Tucson was a ranch-style home in a quiet subdivision where every house looked identical. Beige stucco, red tile roofs, desert landscaping, the kind of place where neighbors minded their own business and strangers were noticed immediately. Rodriguez's team had gotten them out of the park before Richard could close the trap. Federal agents had blocked his Mercedes, created enough confusion for Grace and Gabriel to disappear into an unmarked vehicle. Hayes had been extracted separately. Within 2 hours they were in Tucson, 90 miles from Phoenix, supposedly safe. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the safe house windows, casting geometric shadows across the carpeted floor. Grace sat on the couch beside Gabriel, watching 2 FBI agents patrol the perimeter outside. A third agent, a young man named Torres, monitored security cameras from a laptop at the kitchen table. You're safe here, Rodriguez had said before leaving to coordinate the investigation. Richard Blackwood has connections, but he can't reach you inside federal protection. Trust the system, let it work. Grace wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that the nightmare was ending. But 3 years of homelessness had taught her that systems failed, that institutions protected themselves, not the vulnerable. That trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Gabriel sat beside her, his shoulder wound, freshly dressed by the FBI's medical team. He looked stronger than he had in days. The fever was gone. Colour had returned to his face, but his eyes held the same haunted quality Grace saw in her own reflection. The look of someone who'd lost everything and was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Hayes stood at the window, watching the street. He hadn't said much since they arrived, just positioned himself where he could see threats coming. Old military instincts that never died. I don't like this, Hayes said quietly. Too exposed. Too many windows. One entrance. If someone wanted us dead, this would be easy. FBI chose the location, Torres said from the kitchen. It's secure. Secure is relative when your enemy has unlimited resources. Grace stood and moved to the kitchen, needing water, needing movement, needing something to do besides sit and wait. She was filling a glass from the tap when she noticed Torres's laptop screen. Security camera feeds from outside. Front yard, backyard, side gates. And on the street, 3 houses down, a white utility van that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. Is that van supposed to be there? Grace asked. Torres glanced at the screen. Probably a repair crew. Neighborhood has service vehicles all the time, but something about the van felt wrong. The way it was parked. The tinted windows. The absence of any company logo. The front window shattered in a spray of crystal shards. Grace hit the floor instinctively. Gabriel dove behind the couch. Hayes already had his gun drawn, moving toward cover. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Bullets punched through walls. Torres went down, blood blooming across his shirt. The two agents outside were returning fire, but they were outgunned, outnumbered. "Back door!" Hayes shouted. "Move!" Gabriel grabbed Grace's hand and pulled her toward the kitchen. They ran low, glass crunching under their feet. Behind them, more gunfire, screaming, the sounds of men dying. Hayes covered their retreat, firing through the broken window at shapes moving outside. "Go! I'll hold them!" They burst through the back door into blinding Arizona sunlight. The backyard was small, surrounded by a wooden fence. Gabriel boosted Grace over, then pulled himself after her despite the pain it caused his shoulder. They dropped into the neighbor's yard, kept running. Behind them, the gunfire intensified. Grace heard Hayes shouting. Heard return fire from what sounded like multiple weapons. Then an explosion, the safe house erupting in flames. They ran through 3 more backyards, climbing fences, dodging startled residents, finally emerging onto a residential street 2 blocks away. Grace's lungs burned. Gabriel was limping, his face twisted with pain. A car screeched to a halt beside them. Grace spun, ready to run again, but it was Hayes behind the wheel of a stolen sedan, blood streaking down the side of his face from a cut above his eye. "Get in!" They threw themselves into the back seat. Hayes accelerated before Grace even got the door closed. Behind them, smoke rose from the safe house. Fire trucks were already responding, sirens wailing. "Rodriguez?" Grace asked. "Wasn't there." "Torres is dead. The 2 perimeter agents are dead." Hayes took a sharp turn, then another, putting distance between them and the attack. "There's a mole." "Had to be." "Richard knew exactly where we were. Knew exactly when to hit." I saw the red dot on his chest. The laser sight had appeared on Gabriel's shirt for just a fraction of a second before Hayes swerved the car. A sniper. Somewhere above them, on a rooftop or upper floor. Hayes saw it too. He took 3 more random turns, driving with the precision of someone trained in evasive maneuvers. The red dot didn't reappear. "Where are we going?" Gabriel asked. "Somewhere even the FBI doesn't know about," Hayes said. "I've got friends. People I served with. People who owe me." They drove for 40 minutes, leaving Tucson behind, heading into empty desert where surveillance cameras didn't exist and cell phone signals died. An abandoned motel appeared on the horizon. Single story, 12 units, paint peeling. Neon sign long dead. Someone was already at the motel when we arrived. 3 men, military bearing, hard faces. They moved like Hayes moved, with the controlled efficiency of people trained to kill. But when they saw Hayes, their expressions softened. "Bobby," one of them said, gripping Hayes' hand. "Been a long time." "Need a favor, Martinez. These 2 are running from someone with serious reach. FBI's compromised. We need somewhere to disappear." Martinez looked at Grace and Gabriel. "How serious?" "Dead federal agents serious. Safe house blown up serious." Martinez nodded. "We can help. Got a place in the mountains. Off-grid. No one knows about it except the team." Grace helped Gabriel into one of the motel rooms while Hayes coordinated with his former unit. Gabriel collapsed onto the bed, his face grey with pain. His wound started bleeding again, badly. The bandages Rodriguez's medical team had applied were soaked through. The stress of running, the climbing, the fear had torn open the partially healed gunshot wound. Blood seeped through his shirt, spreading in a dark stain across his shoulder. Grace pulled off his shirt and unwrapped the bandages. The wound looked angry, inflamed. She cleaned it with supplies from Hayes' emergency kit, packed it with fresh gauze, wrapped it tight. "We might not survive this," Gabriel said quietly. "Richard has infinite resources. He has people inside the FBI. He can track us anywhere." Grace's hand stilled on his bandage. "I know. You should leave. Take Hayes' friends up on their offer. Disappear into the mountains. Live without you. I'm already dead. Have been since the moment Richard killed Lily. I'm just finishing what I started." Grace cupped his face in her hands. "You listen to me, Gabriel Stone. I found you chained in a basement, dying alone in the dark. I didn't save your life just to watch you throw it away now. We survive together or we don't survive at all, but I'm not leaving you." The agent's last words were a warning. Torres had gasped it out before he died. Hayes told them later. Red folder, Rodriguez's desk. Check the red folder. He'd known something. Had discovered something about the mole. Had died before he could say what. On the motel television, the afternoon news played, and there was Richard Blackwood again, standing behind a podium, cameras flashing. "I'm offering a $5 million reward," Richard announced, "for information leading to the capture of Gabriel Stone and his accomplice." Grace's driver's license photo filled the screen. Her face, Her name, Grace Holloway. Homeless. Unstable, possibly armed and dangerous. She has aided and abetted a federal fugitive. If you see these individuals, do not approach. Contact authorities immediately. Grace stared at her own face on national television, the face of a criminal. An accomplice, a danger to society. Richard had just made her visible to everyone in America, and in doing so had made sure she could never disappear again. Martinez had contacts Grace never expected, not just former military, federal prosecutors who'd served alongside him in Iraq. People who understood that sometimes justice required bypassing corrupted systems entirely. Denver, Martinez said, spreading a map across the motel room table. Federal prosecutor named Catherine Wells. She's clean. No connections to Phoenix. No way Richard Blackwood can touch her. She's been building a task force investigating corruption in western states. She'll listen. Denver's 800 miles, Gabriel said, through multiple states, highway cameras, toll booths. Every cop in the Southwest has our faces. You have a better option? Silence answered him. Hayes laid out the plan. They'd leave at dawn, take back roads through Arizona and New Mexico, avoid major highways until Colorado. Martinez would provide a different vehicle, false plates, supplies for the journey. His team would create diversions, feed false information about sightings in California to pull Richard's people west. It's risky, Hayes said, but staying here is death. Moving is survival. They left the motel at 5 in the morning, the sky just beginning to lighten over the desert mountains. Martinez had provided a nondescript SUV, grey and forgettable. Grace drove first shift while Gabriel rested in the passenger seat, his shoulder wound freshly dressed. Hayes followed in a separate vehicle, maintaining distance but staying close enough to provide backup if needed. The first 4 hours went smoothly. Empty roads through Arizona high desert, small towns that barely registered their passage. Gas stations where Grace paid cash and kept her face turned away from security cameras. By noon, they'd crossed into New Mexico. That's when the trouble started. Gabriel's burner phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Just coordinates and a time. He showed Grace. It's Patricia Morrison's emergency contact protocol, Gabriel said. She's trying to warn us about something. The coordinates pointed to a location they'd pass in 20 minutes. A rest stop off Highway 60. Gabriel called the number. Patricia answered on the first ring, her voice tight with fear. They know you're heading to Denver, she said. Don't ask me how. There's a mole deeper than we thought. Richard has people monitoring every federal building between Phoenix and Colorado. They're waiting for you. How do we get the evidence to Wells? You can't. Not safely. But I can. I'm flying to Denver this afternoon. I'll take everything to her directly. You just need to stay alive long enough for the arrests to happen. The call ended. Grace and Gabriel looked at each other. Stay alive. Such a simple instruction. Such an impossible task. They merged onto Interstate 25 North, the fastest route to Denver but also the most exposed. Traffic was moderate. Midday sun beat down on the highway, heat shimmering off the asphalt. Grace kept the SUV at exactly the speed limit. Invisible, ordinary, just another vehicle among thousands. Hayes called. You've got a tail. Black sedan, 3 cars back. Picked you up at the last interchange. Grace checked the mirror. Found the sedan. Her stomach dropped. How many people? At least 2 in the vehicle, probably more coordinating. They're tracking you through highway cameras. Every time you pass one, they know exactly where you are. Gabriel pulled up a map on his phone. Next exit is 12 miles. After that, nothing for 30 miles. We can't make 30 miles with them on us, Grace said. We don't have a choice. Grace accelerated. The sedan matched her speed. She went faster. 75. 80. The sedan stayed locked on them. The tyre blew at 80 miles an hour. The front passenger tyre exploded, shredded rubber flying. The SUV lurched violently to the right. Grace fought the wheel, trying to maintain control, but at 80 miles an hour on a highway with the tyre completely gone, physics won. They spun. Once. The world became a blur of sky and asphalt and guardrail. Grace heard Gabriel shouting her name, felt his hand grab her arm. He pushed me out seconds before impact. Gabriel's hand shoved her sideways, down below the dashboard. His body covered hers, protecting her. The SUV hit the guardrail with a sound like the world ending. Metal screaming, glass shattering. The vehicle flipped, rolled, came to rest upside down in the median. Silence, broken only by the hiss of the destroyed engine and Grace's ragged breathing. Gabriel? Her voice came out cracked, terrified. I'm here. He was above her, still shielding her with his body. Blood ran down his face from a cut on his forehead. Can you move? Grace tested her limbs. Everything hurt, but nothing felt broken. Yes. They crawled out through the shattered windshield. The highway stretched empty in both directions. The black sedan had stopped 100 yards back, doors opening, men emerging. A semi-truck pulled onto the shoulder ahead of them, air brakes hissing. The driver, a woman in her 60s with grey hair and kind eyes, jumped down from the cab. Oh my God, are you hurt? I saw the whole thing. That tire just exploded. Come on, get in the truck. I'm calling an ambulance. No ambulance, Gabriel said quickly. Please, we're okay, just shaken up. The woman looked at them, at Grace's desperate eyes, at Gabriel's protective stance, at the men approaching from the black sedan. You're running from something, the woman said, not a question. Yes. She made a decision. Get in. They climbed into the semi's cab. The woman was already moving, pulling back onto the highway, accelerating with the confidence of someone who'd driven millions of miles. Behind them, the men from the sedan ran back to their vehicle, but a semi-truck had 50 tons and a head start. By the time they got turned around, Grace and Gabriel were miles ahead. Name's Ruth, the woman said. I'm hauling to Colorado Springs. That work for you? Denver, Grace said. We need to get to Denver. Denver it is. Ruth asked no more questions. Just drove steady and sure, while Grace and Gabriel sat in the passenger seat trying to process what had just happened. They'd survived. Again. Against impossible odds, because a stranger had chosen kindness over indifference. Ruth dropped them at a truck stop outside Denver 6 hours later. Whatever you're running from, she said, I hope you make it. You've got the look of people fighting for something that matters. Thank you, Grace said. You saved our lives. Then make sure those lives count for something. Federal Prosecutor Catherine Wells's office was downtown, a modern building of glass and steel. Grace and Gabriel arrived looking like disaster survivors, bruised, bloody, exhausted. The receptionist took one look at them and reached for the phone, probably to call security. We need to see Catherine Wells, Gabriel said. Tell her Gabriel Stone is here. Tell her we have evidence of federal crimes involving corruption in Arizona. The receptionist's eyes widened. She made the call. 2 minutes later, Catherine Wells herself appeared, tall, African-American, sharp eyes that missed nothing. My office, she said. Now, they followed her into a conference room. Wells closed the door, pulled the blinds. The prosecutor's face went pale reading the evidence. Patricia Morrison had sent it ahead via encrypted email. Wells had been reviewing it when they arrived. Documents, recordings, financial records. Everything Gabriel had given his lawyer. Everything that proved Richard Blackwood had built an empire on fraud, bribery, and murder. I've been investigating Stone Properties for 18 months, Wells said. We suspected corruption but couldn't prove it. Couldn't get anyone on the inside to talk. Everyone was too scared. She looked at Gabrielle. You're the break we needed. Gabrielle and Grace gave their statements. The warehouse, the chains, the torture, Richard's confession about Lily, the frame-up, the embezzlement Richard had committed and blamed on Gabriel, the bribes to officials, the mole in the Phoenix FBI. Wells recorded everything, asked questions, took notes. Her assistant brought in a medical team to treat their injuries from the crash. FBI agents burst in with guns drawn. Grace's heart stopped. But Wells raised her hand. They're with me, my team. The people I trust absolutely. The agents lowered their weapons. One of them, a senior agent named Brooks, stepped forward. We have warrants ready, just waiting for your authorization. Wells looked at the evidence one more time, at Gabriel's testimony, at the mountain of proof that Richard Blackwood had orchestrated everything. Then the prosecutor made a phone call that changed everything. Judge Morrison, Wells said into the phone. Federal judge, not the corrupted local one. This is Catherine Wells. I'm requesting immediate authorization for multiple federal arrest warrants. Charges include wire fraud, racketeering, murder for hire, witness tampering and corruption of federal officials. Yes, I'll send the evidence package now. She hung up. Warrants approved. Brooks, execute them. Now. The FBI team mobilized. Coordination with multiple field offices. SWAT teams deploying. Richard Blackwood's known locations identified. His home, his office, the Stone Properties headquarters. Wells turned on the television in her conference room. He's giving a press conference right now. Let's see how long it lasts. The screen showed Richard Blackwood behind a familiar podium, cameras everywhere. He was mid-sentence discussing his continued efforts to assist authorities in locating the fugitive Gabriel Stone when federal agents appeared on screen. They moved in fast, professional, no hesitation. Richard Blackwood, you're under arrest for wire fraud, racketeering and murder. Put your hands behind your back. Richard's face transformed. shock, rage, fear. He tried to speak, but the agents were already cuffing him, reading his rights, walking him past stunned reporters toward waiting vehicles, live television, the whole country watching. The man who'd destroyed lives, killed a child, corrupted systems, finally getting dragged away in handcuffs. Grace watched the screen, tears streaming down her face. Gabriel's hand found hers, held tight. Justice. Finally. After everything. Justice. 3 months had passed since Richard Blackwood's arrest. 3 months of protective custody, depositions, endless meetings with prosecutors. 3 months of waiting for the moment when truth would finally face power in a courtroom. The trial took place in Denver Federal Court, a modern building of marble and glass where afternoon sunlight poured through tall windows. The courtroom was packed. Media in the gallery, victims of Richard's schemes filling the benches. And at the defense table, Richard Blackwood himself, still handsome in his expensive suit, still projecting confidence even with federal marshals flanking him. Grace sat in the witness waiting room, her hands trembling. She'd traded her cleaning clothes for a simple dress Catherine Wells had helped her buy. Her hair was clean, styled. She looked nothing like the homeless woman who'd stumbled into a warehouse 4 months ago, but inside she still felt invisible. Still felt like someone the world had discarded. "You're going to do great," Gabriel said beside her. He'd testified yesterday, walking the jury through every detail of Richard's betrayal, the fraud, the conspiracy, the murder of his daughter disguised as an accident. His testimony had been devastating, backed by recordings, documents, financial records that painted a picture of corruption so deep it shocked even seasoned prosecutors. Now it was Grace's turn. The bailiff called her name. Grace stood, smoothed her dress, walked into the courtroom. Every eye turned to watch her, the homeless woman, the nobody, the person Richard's defense team would try to destroy on the stand. Catherine Wells stood to question her. "Miss Holloway, please tell the jury how you came to meet Gabriel Stone." Grace took a breath. Then she told the story. The warehouse, the basement, finding Gabriel chained to support beams, beaten, shot, left to die, the blood, the chains, the moment he whispered about his daughter, and Grace felt her own dead child's ghost rise up to meet her. The courtroom was silent, except for her voice. "Why did you help him?" Wells asked. "Because I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to need help and have everyone look away. I couldn't be that person. Couldn't walk past someone dying and pretend I hadn't seen." Richard's defense attorney stood for cross-examination. A man in his 60s, silver-haired, the kind of lawyer who'd made a career destroying witnesses. The defense attorney asked the question I dreaded. "Ms. Holloway, you were homeless when you claimed to have found my client's alleged victim, correct?" "I was homeless. I am not anymore. And you'd lost your daughter 3 years prior, correct? A traumatic loss that resulted in financial ruin and ultimately homelessness." "Yes." "So you were in a vulnerable mental state, grieving, desperate. Is it possible you were so desperate for purpose, for meaning, that you constructed this elaborate story, that you saw an injured man and projected your own trauma onto him?" Grace looked the attorney in the eyes. "I found Gabriel Stone chained in a basement with a gunshot wound and knife wounds across his ribs. That's not trauma projection. That's medical fact. The doctors who treated him confirmed every injury I described. But you're not a doctor, are you? You dropped out of nursing school." "I left nursing school when my daughter got sick, when insurance denied her treatment. When I had to choose between education and trying to save her life." Grace's voice didn't waver. "I chose my daughter. I'd make the same choice again." The attorney tried to paint her as unstable, unreliable, motivated by money or attention, but Grace had lived through worse than his questions, had survived 3 years of invisibility, had found the courage to walk into danger when every instinct screamed to run. Her testimony stood. Gabriel testified again, reinforcing Grace's account. Hayes took the stand, describing what he'd witnessed at the warehouse, the men loading an unconscious Gabriel into a car trunk. Patricia Morrison presented the evidence, walking the jury through financial documents that proved Richard's fraud scheme stretched back years. Then came the parade of corrupt officials Richard had bribed, police officers who'd looked the other way, city council members who'd approved permits they shouldn't have, a judge who'd accepted payments to rule favourably on zoning disputes. Each one had accepted plea deals, agreeing to testify against Richard in exchange for reduced sentences. One by one they exposed the network Richard had built, the empire of corruption, the system designed to protect the powerful and crush anyone who threatened them. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Grace and Gabriel waited in a hotel room Catherine Wells had secured for them. Federal protection had ended after the trial began, but Wells had promised they'd be safe. Richard's organization was collapsing. His associates were fleeing or cooperating. His power was gone. On the third day, word came. The jury had reached a verdict. The jury foreman stood. The courtroom held its collective breath. Gabrielle's hand found Grace's, gripping tight. On the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of racketeering, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of murder for hire, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of witness tampering, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of corruption of federal officials, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty on all counts. Richard Blackwood's face went white. His attorney argued for bail pending appeal. The judge denied it immediately. Sentencing came 2 weeks later, the maximum on all counts. Life in federal prison without possibility of parole. Then the judge did something unprecedented. Judge Morrison, the federal judge who'd authorized the warrant, stood. Before I close these proceedings, I want to address the failures that allowed Richard Blackwood's crimes to continue for so long. Our justice system is designed to be blind, but too often it's blind to the suffering of ordinary people while protecting the powerful. Miss Holloway, a homeless woman with every reason to look away, showed more courage and integrity than entire institutions designed to uphold the law. The court apologizes for these failures, and the court thanks you for your service to justice. The gallery erupted in applause. Media coverage that had once painted Grace as an accomplice now told a different story. The homeless hero who saved a life. The woman who fought corruption and won. Cable news ran segments about her courage. Newspapers wrote editorials about how the invisible members of society often see what everyone else refuses to acknowledge. Gabriel's name was cleared completely. Federal investigators confirmed he'd been framed, that every allegation against him had been fabricated by Richard. Stone Properties was returned to him, along with frozen assets and accounts. Outside the courthouse after sentencing, media swarmed them. Cameras, microphones, reporters shouting questions. Grace felt the old instinct to run, to hide, to make herself small and invisible, but Gabriel took her hand, stepped forward to the microphones. Cameras flashing everywhere. "My name is Gabriel Stone," he said, his voice carrying across the courthouse steps. "4 months ago, I was chained in a warehouse, left to die. The system had failed me. Justice had abandoned me. But one person, a homeless woman with nothing to gain and everything to lose, chose to see me, chose to help, chose to stand with me when everyone else looked away." He turned to Grace. "Grace Holloway saved my life. Not just physically. She gave me hope when I had none. She showed me that courage doesn't require wealth or power or status, it just requires caring enough to act. Everything that happened here, every corrupt official exposed, every piece of justice served, started because one woman refused to walk away from someone in need." Gabriel's eyes held hers. "Grace, you gave me back my life. Now I'd like to spend the rest of it making sure you never feel invisible again." The cameras captured it all. The moment a billionaire developer publicly thanked the homeless woman who'd saved him, the moment Grace Holloway stopped being invisible and became someone the whole world finally saw. 1 year later, the Phoenix Convention Center hosted an afternoon ceremony that would have seemed impossible to Grace Holloway 12 months earlier. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city where her life had fallen apart and been rebuilt from ashes. The Second Chance Foundation occupied an entire wing of the convention center for its first anniversary celebration. Banners hung from the ceiling displaying the foundation's mission, seeing the invisible, restoring the forgotten, building hope. 500 people filled the space. Donors, volunteers, success stories, media covering the event that had captured national attention. Grace stood backstage, smoothing the fabric of her dress. A year ago, she'd owned one outfit. Now she had an apartment, a job, a purpose that filled the emptiness her daughter's death had carved into her soul. She directed the foundation Gabriel had built in honor of 2 little girls named Lily, the foundation that took homeless individuals, especially those with medical backgrounds, and gave them the resources to rebuild their lives. "You ready?" Gabriel appeared beside her, wearing a suit that actually fit him now instead of the blood-soaked rags she'd first seen him in. His shoulder had healed completely, the physical scars remained, but the haunted look in his eyes had faded, replaced by something Grace had learned to recognize as peace. "I don't know what to say to all these people," Grace admitted. "Tell them the truth. That's all you've ever done." Hayes joined them, wearing the security chief uniform of the foundation he now protected. The homeless veteran had found his purpose too, training other veterans to provide protection for the foundation's clients. His military contacts had become the backbone of their security operations. 5 minutes, Hayes said. The governor just arrived. So did 3 senators. You've got serious attention out there. The ceremony began with video testimonials. Former homeless individuals whose lives the foundation had transformed. A woman who'd been a surgical nurse before addiction destroyed her career, now clean and working at a Phoenix hospital again. A man who'd lost everything in a divorce, now running his own medical supply business. A teenager who'd aged out of foster care, now in college studying to become a paramedic. Each person told the same story. They'd been invisible, forgotten, written off by society until someone saw them, until someone believed they deserved a second chance. Grace took the stage to thunderous applause. She looked out at the sea of faces, people who mattered according to society's definition, wealthy donors, politicians, business leaders, but scattered throughout the crowd were the people who mattered to Grace, the ones she'd helped, the invisible made visible. A year ago, Grace began, her voice steady despite her nerves. I was living in a van, cleaning buildings for cash, believing I had nothing left to offer the world. Then I found a man chained in a basement and everything changed. She told the story. Not the sanitized version the media preferred, but the real one, the fear, the blood. The moment she could have walked away but chose to stay. The realization that one choice, one act of seeing someone else's humanity could start something bigger than herself. Gabriel and I built this foundation because we know what it feels like to be invisible, Grace said. We know what it means when society decides you don't matter anymore. But here's what we learned. Every person matters. Every life has value. Every act of courage, no matter how small, creates ripples that spread farther than we can imagine. Gabriel joined her on stage. He talked about his daughter, about how losing Lily had nearly destroyed him, about how Grace had given him a reason to fight back, to turn grief into purpose. We named this foundation for 2 little girls who deserved longer lives, Gabriel said. But it exists because of one woman who refused to let me die alone in the dark. Grace Holloway is the bravest person I've ever known, and I've asked her to marry me. The crowd gasped. Gabriel pulled a ring from his pocket, knelt on stage in front of 500 people and every camera in Phoenix. You saved my life, he said to Grace. Let me spend the rest of it loving you. Grace's answer was lost in her tears, but the ring on her finger spoke clearly enough. The ceremony continued with more testimonials. A homeless couple reunited with their children after the foundation provided housing and job training. A former addict, celebrating 2 years clean, now working as a counselor helping others. A veteran with PTSD who'd found community and healing through the foundation's programs. Patricia Morrison took the stage to announce the foundation's expansion. Thanks to Gabriel Stone's resources and the national attention Grace's courage generated, we're opening Second Chance Foundation centers in 12 cities across America. We're partnering with medical schools to create pathways for people with healthcare backgrounds to return to their professions. We're proving that society's invisible people are often its most valuable. Media coverage of the event was overwhelming, not just local news, but national networks. The love story everyone wanted to hear. The billionaire and the homeless woman. The fairy tale with a foundation of real courage and genuine transformation. But after the ceremony ended, after the donors left and the cameras stopped rolling, Grace and Gabriel drove to a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of Phoenix. 2 graves, side by side, both marked with the name Lily. One for Gabriel's daughter, one for Grace's. They'd arranged it months ago, a memorial where 2 little girls who'd never met could rest together, where 2 parents who'd lost everything could come and remember and heal. Grace knelt beside her daughter's grave, placing fresh flowers. I found purpose again, baby girl. I'm helping people the way I wanted to help you. I hope that makes you proud. Gabriel placed flowers on his daughter's grave. We're building something beautiful in your name, something that lasts, something that matters. They stood together, hands intertwined, as afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cemetery grounds. 2 people who'd been broken by loss, now building something whole from the pieces. Do you ever think about that day? Grace asked. The warehouse. The chains. How close you came to dying. Every day, Gabriel said. I think about how you could have walked away, how you had every reason to, how you chose courage instead of safety. I think about it too. How finding you gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Hope. Purpose. The belief that one person can make a difference. They returned to Grace's apartment that evening, not the van she'd lived in for 3 years, but a real home with walls and windows and a view of the city. Hayes was already there, reviewing security footage from the foundation ceremony, ever vigilant even though Richard Blackwood was serving life in federal prison. Gabrielle pulled out blueprints for the new foundation centers. Grace reviewed applications from people seeking help. They worked side by side, planning the future they were building together. We should set a wedding date, Gabriel said. Small ceremony, Grace replied. Just the people who matter, Hayes. Patricia, Catherine Wells. The people from the foundation, the people who saw us when we were invisible. Gabriel's phone rang. Patricia calling with news that another city wanted to partner with the foundation. Another opportunity to help more people. The work was never finished. The invisible would always need someone to see them, but Grace had learned something in that dark basement a year ago. She'd learned that courage was a choice, that one person choosing to act could change everything, that the invisible often see what everyone else refuses to acknowledge. She'd been homeless, broken, written off by a world that measured worth in dollars and status. But she'd chosen to help a stranger chained in darkness, and that choice had created ripples that kept spreading, touching lives she'd never meet, helping people she'd never know. Grace Holloway had been invisible. Now she was a force that changed the world, one person at a time, all because she'd refused to look away when someone needed help. Your voice matters. Your actions matter, even when you feel powerless, especially when you feel powerless, because sometimes one choice is all it takes to change everything. That's how a homeless woman became someone who mattered. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever helped a stranger despite the risk? Have you ever felt invisible but found your voice? I would really appreciate it if you could share your thoughts about my videos in the comments. Your feedback helps me improve and create even better content for you. Thank you for being here until the very end.